Hello everyone, and welcome back to part 5 of Mr. Mike's guitar build. In today's video, we're going to cover another hole that needs to be drilled out on the back of the guitar. This is one I meant to include in last week's video, but it somehow slipped through the cracks. We'll start by drilling the hole for the toggle switch, and then move on to routing out the pickup cavities, and finally wrap things up by routing out the neck pocket. Thanks for coming back for part 5. If you're enjoying the series, please give the video a thumbs up. And feel free to share this with all your friends, if you have friends. Let's get into it. Next, we're going to mark the center location for the toggle switch. I start by using OWL to make a small clear center mark. This gives the bit something to register into and helps prevent it from wandering when we start drilling. This step may seem minor, but it makes a big difference in keeping the hole clean and exactly where it needs to be. For the front of the guitar, I'm using a 1/2 inch Forstner bit to drill the hole for the toggle switch. This hole only needs to be about 1/2 inch deep, just enough to allow the switch to pass through cleanly without removing unnecessary material. When we come back through on the other side, we will get it to the correct depth. The location of this hole is critical. We need to stay far enough away from the edge of the guitar so the switch has proper support and we don't weaken the body. Placing it too close to the edge can lead to cracking, breakage, and other issues later when tightening the hardware. I always take a moment here to double check the alignment and spacing before committing to the cut. Once the front hole is drilled, I flip the body over and move to the back side to create a cavity for the toggle switch itself. For this, I switch to a 1 3/8 inch Forstner bit. This larger bit allows enough room for the body of the switch and the wiring, and any movement needed during installation. Just like the cavity control, the depth here is set to a total thickness of the guitar minus 4 millimeters. That leaves a thin but safe layer of material on the front face so the switch sits securely without breaking through the face. Again, this is not something you want to eyeball. Set the depth stop carefully and take your time. I drill in controlled passes, clearing chips frequently and making sure not to force the bit. The material left behind here will be fairly thin, so slow and steady drilling is the safest approach. Taking the time to do this properly ensures the toggle switch fits cleanly, sits flat, and functions exactly the way it should once the guitar is assembled. This is another one of those steps where patience really pays off. A clean, well-placed toggle switch cavity makes final assembly easier and gives the guitar a much more professional finish. Now that we've checked the neck and confirmed it lines up with the center of the body, we can move on to routing out the pickup cavities. All of the material we cleared out earlier on the drill press with the Forstner bit was done specifically to make this step easier, cleaner, and safer. The first step we need to do is realign the pickup routing jig. Just like before, this jig references the outside edges of the guitar body, so it's critical that it's lined up perfectly. I take my time here, checking all the sides and making sure nothing has shifted. If the jig is off, the pickup cavity will be off, and that's not something you want to discover later. Once I'm happy with the alignment, I clamp the jig down to the workbench. And when I say clamp it down, I mean tight, super tight. This jig cannot move. If it shifts even a little bit while routing, you'll end up with uneven edges or a sloppy cavity. There's really no such thing as over clamping here. Just to be clear, we're using the same jig that matches the face of the guitar. The first pickup jig we used earlier. I'm mentioning it so there's no confusion about which template is being used at this stage. Before turning on the router, I set the depth of the cut. I'm only taking about a 1/4 inch per pass. We don't want to remove too much material at once. Shallow passes gives you more control, reduces tear out, and keeps the router from grabbing or chattering. When routing the inside radius of the pickup cavity, direction matters. I'm moving the router in a clockwise direction. If you go the opposite way, the router can start to self-feed. It greatly increases the risk of blowout or chip out along the edges. So the rule here is slow and steady and clockwise. I do the first pass on one pickup, then I move over and do a first pass on the second pickup. After that, I just keep going back and forth between the two cavities, lowering the bit each time until I reach the final depth. This keeps things consistent and avoids putting too much stress on the router or bit. The final depth of these cabinets will match the depth we established earlier on the drill press. And if you miss a small area along the way during one pass, that's totally fine. Don't chase it aggressively. You can always come back and clean it out on the next pass. If you reach a point where your router bit can't go any deeper while still referencing the jig, you've got another option. At this stage, you can remove the top template because Now the inside walls of the pickup cavity are already established. The router bit bearing can safely reference the freshly cut walls, which functions the same as the jig. On the sides of each pickup cavity, I also wrote a small vertical slot matching the depth of the holes we drilled earlier with the Forstner bit. These slots are only about 3/8 of an inch tall. The key here is restraint. I don't want to go too far into the sides because that would start to look sloppy and uneven. These small slots serve a purpose. They give the pickup height screws a bit of up and down wiggle room, which makes the final adjustment easier when it comes time to install the pickups. It's a small detail, but it makes a big difference during setup. And once that's done, there you go. Everything is cleaned up, squared off, and fully routed. The pickup cavities are finished and ready. Now we can move on to the next step of the build. For this build, I'm not making a neck. I ordered a pre-made neck off of Amazon, and that's what I'll be using. And I'll say this right up front. Don't route your neck pocket until you actually have your neck in hand. I really mean that. The neck pocket is one of those steps where close enough turns into a problem fast. Different necks, even ones listed as same size, can vary a little in width, heel shape, and how they sit in the pocket. So get the neck first, measure it, and build your pocket around the neck you're actually using. For the neck pocket depth, we are aiming at 3/4 of an inch deep at the top face of the guitar. That gives the neck heel enough seating depth for a solid fit while keeping the geometry right for setup later on. Now the important part here is that the neck pocket isn't perfectly flat. There's a slight angle, about 3 degrees slope. To make that consistent and repeatable, I made the jig that matches the slope, and I built that jig using the table saw. To cut the slope, I set the saw blade to an 87-degree, tilting it to my left, and then I pushed a piece of MDF through with the blade standing upright. I'll be honest, it's a bit of a sketchy cut, so you need to be comfortable and safe with your setup. If you're going to do this way, the goal is to create a clean angled reference surface so the router has something accurate to follow. After that cut, there was a sharp little edge left behind where the blade couldn't fully reach, so I cleaned that up on the belt sander. Nothing fancy, just smoothing it out over so it sits flat and gives the router a clean, consistent surface to reference. Once the jig is ready, it's time to route the pocket, but this is not the place for deep cuts. You want to take about 1/8 of an inch per pass. Shallow passes give you more control, reduce tear out, and prevent the router from grabbing. The only exception is if you're using longer shank bit and your bearing needs to reach the jig on the first pass. In that case, you may need a slightly deeper first cut, just so that the bearing is actually riding against the jig. The key is the bearing has to be referencing the jig. If it's not, you're basically freehanding and you're going to be regretting it. Before I even turn the rudder on, I clamped the jig down tight to the bench with using 2 clamps. And no, not that kind of tight, I mean tight. If the jig shifts even a little, your neck pocket is going to be off, and you'll feel it in the fit. In the video, you can actually see me retightening my clamps because they weren't locked down tight enough the first time. That's a good reminder, check your clamps, then check them again. Once everything is secure, I start the router away from the workpiece. Then I ease it into the cut. I'm moving in a counterclockwise, keeping both hands on the router the whole time. 2 hands gives you control and keeps the router from tipping. I also put a bit of pressure down over the base plate right above the work, so it stays planted and flat. The router tipping is how you get uneven depth, gouges, and ugly shoulders around the neck pocket. I'm going super slow here because I want this to be accurate. You can see a bit of burning in spots, and that's because my bit is a bit dull. Ideally you want a sharp bit, but in this case I'm using some older bits I've had forever, from my time in the trades. So, they've seen a lot of work. The burn marks don't bother me here because this area will be hidden underneath the neck. Still, if you want the cleanest cut possible, use a sharp bit. It makes a difference. After the first pass, I stop, adjust the depth, and move on to the next pass. Same thing every time. Shallow cuts, steady pace, bearing on the jig, base plate set on top, and just don't rush it. One thing you need to be really careful about here is the thin edge at the bottom of the neck pocket. That little strip of wood can be fragile. especially as you get deeper and remove more support around it. If you get aggressive or you let the router chatter, it's easy to chip and blow at that edge. So keep your hand steady, keep your pass controlled, and pay attention as you get close to the final depth. Once the pocket is routed, I do a dry fit. The neck you see on the bench here is an old neck from a previous build, the one I used to make a bunch of my templates and jigs. It's not the neck that's going to be on this guitar, but it lets me test the fit and check alignment. When I drop the neck in, I'm checking for two things. First, it sits cleanly and flat, and second, it lines up centered with the body. If it's centered and sitting properly, then we're in good shape. But again, final reminder, don't cut your pocket until you have your real neck. That's the part you can't afford to guess on. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Bye.